Hello guys, welcome to the Motor Recon podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Rob. Today I'm with Adam, and I've decided to do a little bit of a special introduction today because we're talking about a subject which is actually quite close to me, which is Le Mans. So, as I'm sure most of you are aware, the 2019 race happened last weekend.
It did.
And we were just going to have a look at the class winners and where there is either a road-going version of the car that won, or if that company makes road cars, so which ones that we think are our favourites.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting topic as well. I've always been quite a big fan of Le Mans.
Well,
obviously, I can't watch the full 24 hours, but I did see a couple of this year's race.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day as well, all these companies are in motor racing for one reason, and that is to sell cars. So obviously, if they can race a car that has an appeal to the public and that they can buy a road-going version of, or at least attracts them to their brand, that's all the more the better, I guess. Yeah. So we're going to kick off with LMP1 and obviously Toyota Zagoo Racing won.
Yes, they did.
Favourite Toyota then that's currently on sale at the moment, or indeed just in history?
GT86 at the moment for me.
Yeah, I'd agree. Obviously with the skinny profile tyres, not too fast.
No, only a 2-litre engine as well. It's not too powerful, not too bad. I think that one is more suited probably as a low-end race car. I know they've been converted a lot into drift cars and things like that, which I think is good. I'm not too much of a big fan of a Supra, as we've discussed in previous episodes.
Yeah.
I think that's too expensive, it's too much of a BMW, not what I'm looking for. So I'd go for the GT86 myself.
So I would actually agree on that front. I think of all Toyota's current cars that are on sale, for me the GT86 is probably my favourite. The Supra, I obviously concur with you. I think that there is a little too much of the BMW DNA in there. As in, I fully understand that working together to develop a car or technology is something that makes life a lot simpler. And obviously having them produced on the same production line isn't a problem either. I think it's just a little bit too obvious.
Yeah, it is.
As in, if you look at some of the switch gears and the screen, for example, and the iDrive, it's sort of a bit too cut and paste.
Yeah, and it's got if you look under the bonnet of the Supra, it's full of BMW stickers and everything like that. It's just, I get it, but at the same time, not for me. GT86 all the way.
I tend to clump the GT86 into the same category as the MX-5.
It is.
So it's a relative, not that fast in a straight line, just good fun, nice chassis, nice to handle. Obviously, they're not exactly the same. One is a soft top after all.
Yeah, I think the GT86 is slightly a higher price bracket. Only slightly, but just in the next price bracket up.
Obviously, my favourite Toyota of all time, though, is the GT2000.
Yes.
So
the Bond.
Yeah. And we went to a classic car show at the NEC in Birmingham a couple of years back now, I think.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, was it last year? Yeah, it was last year, wasn't it?
But it was that. I think that was the first time I saw a Toyota GT2000, and I just thought the shape was to die for.
It is, and they did copy a lot of the sort of European design back then as well, because they were trying to establish themselves in that market.
Yeah. Ironically, that's apparently how the MX-5 came into existence. It was trying to hark back to the European sort of small sports car.
It was.
Turns out they made their own interpretation of it that is sensational, and it's gone on to sell in huge numbers and become part of the motoring world.
And so, when the British sports car industry died off, the MX-5 has kept going.
Yeah.
Which obviously testament to itself.
It's just a great car, and I think... Yeah. You can't really dispute that, really. It's just a great little car. Ticks an awful lot of boxes for people.
Reasonably affordable for most people as well.
Exactly. So, yeah, that's LMP1. LMP2, there isn't really a road-going version of the winner, so I'm just going to skip on to LMGT Pro, which is up at the top there.
Yeah, just need to click on that. There we go.
So, Ferrari 488. So, what do you make of it?
Not a fan of the road car at all, have to be said.
Yeah.
I would much prefer a 458. I don't think it's as clean as it looks. I don't think it sounds anywhere near as nice. I'm sure it drives well. Obviously, I've never driven one, but I'm sure it drives better than the 458 did.
Yeah, we went into this a little bit in a previous podcast when we went to a motor show all not that long ago.
Yeah.
And I think we sort of came to the consensus of that we happen to quite like the 458.
Yeah.
Obviously, I don't mind the 488, and I certainly wouldn't say no to one. I'm quite curious to see what the F8 Tributor adds on to this sort of DNA.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting. It's more of an evolution rather than obviously a whole new car.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you managed to catch Top Gear last week, the new episode, Chris Harris talking about the Pista, actually, the 488 Pista, which I assume, it's more the road-going version of the race car. He was obviously again complaining in there that the switchgear and everything, the instruments, they're over 10 years old. It's the same ones as in the 458. So the F8, I hope, will update those.
I think that is a trouble with an evolutionary design, isn't it? I happen to quite like evolutionary designs.
You're a 911 man, aren't you?
I like the 911 because, and I do like it. I think there is something to be said for honing the design that you have over generations. It is like watching evolution. Yeah. And some people like that. Some people like the fact that the design doesn't change too massively. The case of, why would you fix the stuff that ain't broke? And
I get it. It's not for me personally. I do honestly think the 911 needs a complete redo. I know everyone will disagree, and it's probably a very controversial topic. I just think they need to start again.
But
I'm bored with it.
But for those who don't like the 911, you have the Cayman.
Yeah.
Which is, so instead of being rear-engined, it's mid-engined. And I think there is always that little bit deep inside of me that thinks that the Cayman is being held back because they don't want it to outshine its bigger brother.
Yeah, and I would agree. And the new GT4 and everything has just been launched as well. And
I'm
I think
very excited
I don't think they've made that as good as it can be for that reason.
Yeah.
I don't think they've pushed the boat out anywhere near as much.
I mean, I think dynamically speaking, and as far as a car design is concerned, making it mid-engined instead of rear-engined is a better place to start, just by the way that the laws of physics work, not having all the weight hanging over the back. Now, don't get me wrong, after sort of 50 years of design or whatever with the 911, and fair play to them, they have just stuck to that brief of nope,
they have
engine at the back, and they've now really made it work for it.
Yeah.
As far as driving is concerned, the 911 can shift.
A lot of people do say as well it's one of the best handling and most involved drives you can have.
Yeah.
And to be fair, that probably is true.
Yeah.
But cars, I think, for me, more of an emotional type of thing. I just don't get excited with 911s.
Yeah, for me, the design is sort of... I like a simple, clean design, and I also think that probably one of the reasons why the 911 is so good now is because they don't just throw it out the window and go for a revolution every single time. They have taken what they have and fine-tuned it, and obviously they make big changes between certain models, like obviously removing hydraulic power steering or so whatever, and obviously famously when they eventually had to get rid of the air-cooled sort of flat six and bring in sort of water cooling, more standard and conventional. So there are big changes that have happened.
Yeah.
But I do believe that through their evolutionary design, they've been able to hone what they've got, which is partly, I think it should partly be some of the reason why it is so good at what it does.
Well, they have made good race cars. They came second in the class anyway.
Well, yeah.
And third as well,
I was about to say, and if you go on to the... Obviously, there is a little bit of controversy about the LM GTE ARM class because a Ford GT took it on the road, but unfortunately, due to sort of regulations and things, after the effect, the 911 was promoted to the winner of that category. So, since we've already touched on the 911, maybe we should talk about the Ford GT. Considering I've heard that a particularly spicy version of the Ford GT is
a more track-orientated version.
Yeah.
This obviously is only speculation at the moment, but I've seen the same things all over the sort of automotive news websites and Instagram, things like that. People getting excited about this, and I'm very interested to see what they're going to do.
Well, let's face it, the Ford GT, its standard setup is no slouch by any means. It's fairly track-orientated to begin with.
Yeah, it's had nothing but compliments from people reviewing it and things like that, and owners of the car. There just there's nothing else like it.
Very brave decision when you consider that, obviously, if you cast your mind back to the Ford GT that came out in the early 2000s, which had the big lump and V8 in the back.
Yeah, so that was I know they did do a race version of it, but that was primarily a road car.
And there's no disputing as well, it took its design cues from the Ford GT40 from back in the 60s. As in, it really did just look like the original, but a bit bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, from the exterior at least, it was unmistakably a Ford GT.
To be fair though, even with the new one, I think the new one looks, from the headlights, the front shape and everything, you can definitely tell it is a Ford GT.
It's got the design cues.
Yeah, you can tell, but obviously they've gone a bit more sort of revolutionary with the aero and things like that and just made it a really striking looking car.
It was a very brave decision to get rid of the V8 because That is a gamble because, as you say, even the heritage of the Ford GT is that it is the fact that it was a V8 sort of car, and obviously in 2000 and whatever, the early 2000s when they brought out the new one, they made sure it had a nice V8 in there. And I do remember it catching quite a lot of flack when it was announced that it wasn't going to have a V8. That seems to have gone by the wayside.
Well, I think people have realised they had to, kind of. They didn't have to, but obviously emissions regulations...
Get ahead of the game,
Yeah, get ahead of the game, develop it there in the high-end cars before you trickle it down.
Yeah.
It's obviously lighter weight, which brings the overall weight of the car down, which is better for handling.
Yeah.
It's a much smaller package, which meant they could do the aero stuff they wanted to do, which was obviously the really narrow rear end with a huge side sort of vents going in as well.
Yeah, it really does sort of manage the airflow, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think it works. It sounds great as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that front, yeah.
It's unusual. Well, it's not unusual for a V6, but obviously it's turbocharged as well, which normally takes some of the sound away.
Yeah.
But they've done quite a good job with that.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to see one at Goodwood in a couple of weeks' time.
We will. There's been a few there the last couple of years, and I can't see any reason. Well, I suspect Tim will probably take his, and there'll probably be a few others in the customer car park because there's usually some insane things in there.
So one of the other things I did want to talk about while we're on the topic of motor racing is something that it crops into my mind every now and then, and I read an article a little while back about sort of success ballast and essentially artificially levelling out the playing field in motor racing. And it's all like there are other sports out there that I don't think this sort of other sports outside of motorsport where this sort of artificial levelling of the playing field probably isn't quite so relevant, or so prolific maybe.
Yeah, I would agree.
One of the things that all motorsport categories are very conscious of is they want to make sure that the racing is fair, which is good, obviously, safe, fair enough as well, and also they want it to be competitive. So they want close racing, they want it to be an interesting championship, and obviously we now know that the current state that F1 is in, I mean, let's be honest, the start of the 2019 season, Merck, obviously there have been a couple of occasions where maybe Merck didn't deserve to win it on pace because reliability came into it, or penalties might have muddied the waters slightly, but nevertheless the record shows they've won every race this season so far. Haven't watched the French GP from today yet, so I don't know about
I think
that.
it hasn't finished yet either, has it? So it's still ongoing.
The last time we checked, Hamilton was in the lead, so let's just say for argument's sake that does come to fruition.
I'm 99% sure it will, to be honest.
Yeah.
It will.
So obviously F1 are in that position at the moment where, what do we do about this? The 2021 regs are due in October, so we'll probably wait until then to delve
we'll cover
into
off those when they actually
deeper.
come out.
But we've decided we're going to talk a little bit more about some interesting regulations from other categories of motorsport that level the playing field out. So BTCC is where we're going to start. Yeah,
so if there's anyone listening from abroad, that is the British Touring Car Championships.
Yeah.
And obviously that's probably the equivalent of DTM in Germany, and probably they've probably got others elsewhere in the world as well.
Yeah.
But these do have some interesting things, like you say, the success ballast, which obviously is the higher up in the grid you come. For example, here we've got it up on screen. If you come first, you get 54 kilograms, second 48 kilograms, third 42, and so on, and all the way down to 10th, where you get 6 kilograms. Which I think that it is a good thing to do, and it kind of does work in BTCC.
Yeah, I mean, you rarely see a boring BTCC race.
No, there's crashes, there's more of a level playing field, because everyone, like I say, they have a lot of stringent things as well to make the cars more competitive with each other.
Yeah, this is the other thing that the BTCC has, which obviously I've heard battered around in relation with F1 previously, which is having some standardised components.
Yeah.
So the BTCC has some standardised engine components as well.
Yeah.
And obviously the success ballast comes into it as well, plus the reverse grid race as well. So, in looking here, numbers representing the cars that finish from 6th to 12th position in the second race put into a bowl, and obviously they draw out a number at random to obviously go on to the pole, and it goes backwards from there. So, not entirely. The thing about success ballast, and the trouble I've always found with it is, it does come down to the fundamental problem of you're penalising someone for being good at what they do.
Yeah, and especially with something like this, because BTCC is such a level playing field anyway.
Yeah.
Like the cars are slightly sort of capped on engine sizes and things like that.
They do have standardised components.
Yeah, and standardised
as well,
components.
yeah.
Theoretically, most of the cars should be the similar speed. It's just down to how you set up, say, the suspension or the camber on your wheels or anything like that. Just gives you that extra edge in the corners or on the straights or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I think if you set up your car perfectly for that track and you do really well and you come out first, you then get 54 kilograms of weight chucked in your car
Yeah.
to slow you down. I don't see why that. I get it. Obviously, it's to make people more competitive, but why should you?
And obviously, it does add an element of sort of tactics into it as well. If you want less weight or whatever for a different race during the day.
Yeah.
So there will be more tactics that can be sort of employed with Success Ballast on board with the cars. But yeah, there is something fundamentally artificial about, well, you did well, so have 54 kilograms to,
Yeah.
weigh you down a bit.
Well, there's one recently.
So-
I remember you mentioning it was in an Aston Martin that got ballast put in on another race.
Yeah, I think it might have been an Aston Martin in Le Mans or something like that. But essentially, he qualified well, but then because of the ballast, ended up dropping through the pack once the race actually started. And yeah, it's just something that it seems a little bit too artificial and on the nose for me. And I would rather there were a few standardised parts than... Because then it's still a levelish playing field, but then if you win out of that levelish playing field, you're not being lumped with ballast as well.
I do genuinely find it unfair.
Yeah.
For me personally, I think especially if you look at Formula One now, like you say, it is pretty much a 3-team event. You've got Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull.
Yeah.
And they pretty much dominate everything that comes up. Now, that purely does come down to money in this instance. They've got the money to invest in these cars, the engines, all the technology, the best designers.
Well.
Yeah,
they've got the people. Yeah.
And that's the bit that I don't like, because if you get some of the bottom runners of the teams, they simply don't have the funds to even compete. That's why they're always at the bottom and they never get in any higher unless something ridiculous happens and the whole front of the grid crashes.
Okay. It would be very interesting to see modern BTC without the ballast. That's something that I would be curious to see how that would pan out, because maybe we're completely wrong. Maybe if you remove the ballast out completely or vastly reduce the figures that they have on there, the racing would very much become a sort of standard field at every event. So I'm not saying that it's necessarily right.
I think with BTCC it works slightly better because obviously there's multiple races throughout the day, and obviously they do the sort of the grid flip and everything like that. Everyone kind of gets a chance of being at the front and having a go, which, it kind of works in that instance, maybe.
And let's just say, for example, that you go into race 1 with 54 kilograms of ballast, and because of that, you suffer quite badly and drop down through the field. At least for race 2, you've been able to drop that ballast off.
Yeah, and
so
you're getting back up there again. And it does, for them particularly, it's a I know it's a non-contact sport in that sense, but BTCC... There's always the body rubbing, the crashing, the taking each other out, and that's what actually is entertaining for the fans.
Yeah.
I think Formula One at the moment particularly has become more just of a procession.
Yeah.
Usually I know there is overtaking and things like that, but it's boring.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously F1's got its major regulation shake-up coming in 2021, so I don't know whether Success Ballast might be introduced then.
I can't see it.
I don't necessarily see it, no. I think we're more likely to see something that is a little bit more similar to Formula E.
Yeah.
So I think you're far more likely to see, obviously in Formula E, for those people who do follow the sport, you'll know that they have standardised bodywork. So just to begin with, aero and bodywork, that is standardised.
Yeah, so if you don't have the better designer, then you're not affected by it in any way because you've got the same thing as someone else.
Brings the costs down as well, and obviously it's not a big downforce sport anyways. I've seen a lot of Formula E races where someone's clipped their front wing and they've been able to just carry on and be competitive. Whereas in F1, when someone damages their front wing, it's a disaster. Because
it's a pit to change it. Yeah,
because it's such a complex piece of aerodynamics that when you damage it, it wrecks the airflow.
Yeah.
So obviously it means they're a little bit less fragile to contact.
And also, just looking at it as well, the standard of driving obviously is not up there. Because in F1, they do everything they can to avoid. I know they do it in Formula E, but it doesn't seem like going 3-4 abreast into the first corner and hitting each other, but they carry on because they can. And I think that makes it a little more interesting again.
But I also think Formula E, I think contact's a little bit more inevitable, as it's far more weighted towards extremely close racing on street circuits.
Yeah, the circuits are tiny, aren't they? Really narrow.
They're really narrow, really tiny, and it's a big packed grid.
Yeah, it is.
So,
what are we up to now? 20?
We're up to a lot, yeah. And
24?
obviously more teams are due to start next year as well. So it almost makes contact inevitable.
Yeah.
It's so in a certain respect. So at least the cars aren't so unbelievably fragile that even the smallest amount of contact knocks you out of contention. But yes, you've got standardised bodywork, so that helps to bring the cost down a little bit, I guess. They've also got some standardised parts in the car as well.
Yes,
so
they do,
obviously,
don't they?
so the battery itself is standardised, but they develop their own gearboxes and electric motors and things like that. So I think Formula E has a nice balance of allowing teams to develop their own technology so that they can reasonably go out and say that if you buy a Jaguar that obviously is an electric car, that some of their experiences definitely come from Formula E, and that is true. But it has enough of those standardised parts in there where it does allow to keep the costs down, and it also means that the racing is very close.
Well, yeah, because that's the work. Obviously, Formula 1 used to be like that, where the technology from Formula 1 would eventually trickle down into your everyday cars.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be the case anymore. Some of the braking things might be, and potentially sort of the energy recovery systems.
Sure, yeah.
But other than that, there's nothing in it now.
Well, Formula 1, obviously now, given that they're sort of hampered on the technology they can actually put on the cars. So obviously, and again, it's probably similar with a lot of motorsports. Something that maybe the whole motorsport industry in general, regardless of category, could be facing in the future, which is the technology we want to add to road cars in the future doesn't necessarily line up with what makes good racing. So advanced traction control and sort of like predictive braking or whatever, and all these sort of automated driving aids, if you like, that people want to add to. But that's not racing anymore. You're just handing over control to the car.
Yeah, because they have now got, we've seen it obviously, they've got that robotic Formula E type thing, haven't they? Where the cars can literally robo racing, where the cars go around the circuit themselves. And obviously that is not entertaining to watch in any sense of the matter, because they can't race.
Well, it's also, there is that thing about, despite all the technology that goes into motorsport, whether it be BTCC, World Endurance Championship, Formula E, F1, doesn't matter. The thing that really sells it to people are the drivers and the people.
Yeah.
It's still people. And just like Manuel Fangio back in the 50s or Sterling Moss, your Lewis Hamiltons and Sebastian Vettels of the day, it's still a human-led sport, and there is still that connection back to the heritage.
Yeah.
The cars may have moved on dramatically between 1950 whatever and now, but it's still a person driving it.
In a car.
Yeah.
And you form that bond with those sort of drivers, don't you?
You have your heroes, you have your villains, there's drama and conflict and all the things that make a good story.
Yeah, and I think that does pay into it. I don't think robo racing will ever take off in that sense.
That's what I mean. It's a fantastic display of technology, but you can't get invested the same way as having a human driver behind the wheel.
And I think the only reason they will be doing this is to obviously develop autonomous driving for cars.
Exactly, yeah, and that's my point, and it most definitely has a place in the world, because if you look at the direction in which cars are going, these advanced technologies and sort of AI and things like that are going to play more of a role in driving. But that doesn't really bode well for teams wanting to join motorsport, since motorsport, as far as traditional racing series are concerned, is still a very sort of human-led.
Yeah.
And you don't really want to see the drivers and having the experience of their driving taken away. And again, it's finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah. And one thing I would just mention as well, slightly sort of on a different topic as well, I think, obviously we were talking about BTCC earlier. I think the reason why that took off so much as well, and it's kind of like the Le Mans style thing as well, you can, in theory, go out and buy those cars.
BTCC even more so,
Well, yeah,
because
'cause
they're
it's
more
normal cars.
more attainable cars,
Yeah,
aren't they?
which you don't see in obviously the higher end, even LMP1, Formula 1, Formula E. You're never going to be able to go out and buy those cars, which also will not help you get that bond with it. Because if you see someone going around the track in the car you own,
Yeah.
I know it's not exactly the same, pretty much just the bodywork that's shared and perhaps the engine.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think that's exciting that you get to see your own car being raced around the track.
And to be fair, Formula E have dipped their toes into this with the Jaguar Trophy.
Yeah, they've got the iPace
They have the
trophies,
iPace
haven't you?
Trophy, so
Yeah.
they have dipped their toe into this arena now, to be fair. And maybe that's something they might want to look at to expand on in the future as well. And as you say, I'm with Rallycross, for example, looking to go down sort of a more electric route, if you like. So you're going to start seeing more and more electric or hybrid cars going into motor racing.
Yeah.
So you will start to see
Rallycross
that.
have ballast? I can't remember.
I can't remember.
We'll have to look into that for another one. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think they might. Or some form of rallying has ballast as well, which
I think
might be
Rallycross will be an
interesting to see.
interesting one for another time with the Joker lap and things like that. So
Yeah,
we
all
will
the good
return to that topic.
I love more like watching it. We'll come on to that in another one. But I think so. Where would you like to see racing head in sort of the higher end racing? Obviously, your Formula 1, Formula E, things like that.
I think as far as F1 is concerned, obviously with the new 2021 regs rolling out, I'm not necessarily so fussed by if they start introducing some standardised parts. I understand they need to bring the cost down, and I understand that, so maybe standardised parts are the way to go.
Well, another idea I had for it, and you might agree or disagree on this, but I think they should bring in a much more stringent spending cap.
That's coming in, yeah.
Yeah.
That is being introduced.
Like really stringent, I think, because
whatever that is a proposal that's being thrown about. Yeah.
Whatever the smallest team can afford, that.
Yeah, but
I
the
think that
people
should
will
be
always find ways round, I guess. So they'll get creative with the way that they sort of employ their staff or whatever. So there might be ways around that still. But
yeah, and potentially, if it does come in, it might sort of make it a bit more competitive in that sense, because you can't spend 100 like Mercedes could just go out and spend 100 million on designing a thing, whereas whatever they're called now,
Racing
Point, they wouldn't be able to just go and do that, would they?
Exactly.
So,
the other thing that wouldn't bother me as well is if they roll the aero back. Yes, the cars will be slower. I understand that, but I think something that Formula E has proved is limited aerodynamics can still produce decent racing and good-looking racing cars as well.
People don't watch Formula 1 for how fast the car can go around the track. They watch it for how the racing is. That's why people watch it for the race, not how fast the car can go.
But again, this is the difficulty that we've obviously been so far down the line now, and obviously back in the day in the 60s or whatever, where aerodynamics weren't necessarily so prevalent in motorsport, Formula 1 could just be the pinnacle of motorsport in cars, and essentially it's just a case of, well, that is as fast as those cars can go, and we're still getting good racing. Yeah. Obviously the safety wasn't there at all, and that's something that's brilliantly been brought along today, and obviously you never want to sacrifice that. But you can't just do that these days, because to make the car reach its full potential, it needs to have a lot of downforce, because that's obviously just the way it is now. So it's tough, because if you do roll the aerodynamics on F1 back, there is also something counterintuitive about, say in 2021, if the cars, well, as you say, it happened in relatively recent times, you know, some track records from the early 2000s are still standing.
Yeah, because
over 10 years down the line, and it's something like, well, we're 10 years further on, surely they should be faster. So it's a very hard line to toe.
I think I know it kind of is a bit of irrelevance, but if you look at the Goodwood hill climb record, it's an old Formula 1 car that holds the record. It's not any modern ones.
Yeah, sure, it's Nick Heifeld.
Yeah, I don't know if they are. I don't know if there's any rules coming with the Formula 1 teams now aren't allowing the drivers to go absolutely hell for leather in the cars because they are too fragile. Yeah. Perhaps compared to what they used to be.
I think there's some sort of rules around them not being allowed to bring current Formula 1 cars to demonstrations. Because it's unfair running and things like that.
I understand that, but if they could do last year's car or 2 years old, you'd think it'd still be able to destroy a car from like the 90s.
Yeah, but that's the thing though, because you say even modern racers sort of like we're only just now sort of seeing in recent years those track records actually being beaten, as in on race pace.
Well, I think at Goodwood, it's a slight probably something worth mentioning is the cars can probably never get fast enough to actually use the aero.
Yeah.
Because it's such a narrow single track road, essentially.
And obviously anybody who's been to Goodwood as well will know that it's not exactly the smoothest sort of bit of tarmac to try and, for an F1 car to get its power down. I mean, you have to be a pretty good driver. Well, not pretty good. You have to be pretty sensational.
The best of the best.
You have to be the best of the best to get everything out of it up on a Goodwood hill. So
yeah.
I think that about covers it for today.
Yes, we'll wrap that up there. Obviously, thank you again for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you do want to get in contact with us, you can just go. All the links are down below for all the social media: Facebook, Twitter, you name it.
Yeah.
You can go click on the links and get in touch with us. If you have any topics you want to discuss, again, let us know, and we'll try and cover those off for you. And that's it from us. So we'll see you again next week.
Thanks very much, guys. Bye now.
See you later. Bye.